Statistical analysis often begins with a point estimate. A point estimate is a single summary number computed from a sample that we use to estimate an unknown population parameter. For example, we might use a sample mean to estimate a population mean, or a sample proportion to estimate a population proportion. Throughout statistics, these single number summaries serve as our first attempt to learn about the larger population from a limited sample of data. Suppose a business analyst records the daily revenue of a store for 30 days and finds that the average revenue is $2,500. That sample mean becomes a point estimate of the true average daily revenue for the store. In another example, imagine an epidemiologist surveys 200 patients and finds that 36 of them carry a particular gene variant. The sample proportion is 36 divided by 200, which equals 0.18. This value serves as a point estimate for the unknown population proportion of individuals who carry the gene variant. Although point estimates are easy to compute and understand, they have an important limitation. A point estimate gives us only one value. If we were to collect a different random sample from the same population, we would likely obtain a slightly different statistic. In other words, point estimates vary from sample to sample. Because of this natural sampling variability, statisticians often go beyond a single number and use interval estimates to describe uncertainty. An interval estimate provides a range of plausible values for a population parameter. The most common type of interval estimate is called a confidence interval. A confidence interval includes both a range of values and a specified confidence level. An important component of a confidence interval is the margin of error. The margin of error measures how far the point estimate might reasonably be from the true parameter. One key idea to remember is that larger samples generally produce smaller margins of error, which leads to more precise estimates. When we perform point estimation, our goal is to produce the best possible guess for a population parameter. The way we do this is by computing an appropriate sample statistic. For example, if the parameter of interest is the population mean, denoted by mu, we estimate it using the sample mean, denoted by x bar. If the parameter of interest is the population proportion, denoted by p, we estimate it using the sample proportion, denoted by p hat. These statistics act as our estimates of the unknown parameters. Different parameters require different statistics. For example, depending on the situation, we might estimate a mean, a median, a proportion, or a variance. However, not all estimators are equally good. Some statistics tend to produce estimates that are closer to the true parameter than others. Because of this, statisticians evaluate estimators based on certain desirable properties. Two of the most important properties of a good estimator are center and variability. First, we want the estimator to be centered at the true population parameter. Second, we want the estimator to have small variability so that estimates from different samples are not too spread out. These two ideas are captured by the concepts of unbiasedness and efficiency. An estimator is called unbiased if its sampling distribution is centered at the true population parameter. In other words, the expected value of the estimator equals the parameter it is trying to estimate. For example, the expected value of the sample mean equals the population mean, and the expected value of the sample proportion equals the population proportion. This means that both the sample mean and the sample proportion are unbiased estimators of their respective parameters. Because the sampling distribution of x bar is centered at mu, and the sampling distribution of p hat is centered at p, these statistics do not systematically overestimate or underestimate their parameters. Over many repeated samples, the average of the estimates will equal the true population value. This property is what makes them unbiased estimators. To illustrate the idea of bias, consider two hypothetical estimators for the population mean mu. Estimator A has a sampling distribution centered exactly at mu. Estimator B, however, has a sampling distribution centered somewhere else. because estimator B is shifted away from the true parameter, it systematically misses the correct value. In this situation, estimator A is preferred because it is unbiased. In the figure shown here, the dashed vertical line represents the true value of the parameter mu. The blue curve corresponds to estimator A, and it is centered exactly at mu. The red curve corresponds to estimator B, and it is shifted to the right. This shift indicates bias, meaning that estimator B consistently overestimates the parameter. Because of this systematic error, estimator A is generally preferred. However, being centered at the correct value is not the only property we care about. Two estimators may both be unbiased, yet differ in how much they vary from sample to sample. When comparing such estimators, we generally prefer the one with smaller variability. Smaller variability means the estimates tend to fall closer to the true parameter. If two estimators are both unbiased, the estimator with the smaller standard deviation of its sampling distribution is considered more efficient. Efficiency refers to the precision of the estimator. An efficient estimator produces estimates that are more tightly clustered around the true parameter value. And consider another example involving two estimators that are both unbiased for the parameter mu. Although both are centered at the correct value, their sampling distributions have different spreads. One distribution is narrower, meaning its estimates are more tightly concentrated around the parameter. In the figure shown here, both estimators are centered at mu, so both are unbiased. However, the blue curve representing estimator A is narrower than the red curve representing estimator B. Because the estimates from estimator A vary less from sample to sample, estimator A is considered more efficient. To help visualize these ideas, it can be useful to think about a dartboard analogy. Imagine a dartboard where the center of the board represents the true population parameter. Each time we compute a statistic from a random sample, we can think of that statistic as a dart thrown at the board. In the dartboard figure shown here, each dot represents the value of a statistic computed from a different random sample. The bullseye at the center represents the true population parameter. By examining the pattern of the dots, we can visualize whether an estimator is biased and how much variability it has. In the unbiased, low variance scenario, the points are tightly clustered around the center of the target. This represents an estimator that is both accurate and precise. Its sampling distribution is centered at the true parameter, and its values do not vary very much from sample to sample. In the unbiased, high variance scenario, the points are still centered around the bullseye, but they are much more spread out. On average, the estimator still targets the correct parameter, but any individual estimate may be quite far from that value. This estimator is unbiased but less precise. In the biased, low variance case, the points are tightly clustered but clearly offset from the center of the dartboard. This estimator produces very consistent estimates, but those estimates are consistently wrong. In other words, it is precise but inaccurate. Finally, in the biased, high variance case, the points are both scattered and shifted away from the center. This means the estimator is neither centered at the true parameter nor stable from sample to sample. This is the least desirable situation for statistical estimation. The dartboard analogy highlights the two goals of statistical estimation. We want estimators that aim at the true parameter, which corresponds to unbiasedness. And we want estimators whose values cluster tightly around the parameter, which corresponds to low variability. These ideas explain why certain statistics are used so frequently in statistical inference. Under random sampling, the sample mean and the sample proportion are both unbiased estimators, and they also tend to have relatively small variability compared with many alternatives. Because they combine accuracy and precision, they are central tools throughout statistics.